What's up, listeners? Welcome back to another episode of the Untethering Shame podcast. I'm your host, Kyira Wackett, and today's episode is a call to rethink our relationship with money, not just from the budgeting or investing standpoint, but from this deeply emotional and psychological lens. We're talking shame, self-worth, and the stories that we've inherited about what it means to be good or bad with money. Joining me is Michelle Waymire, a queer anti-capitalist financial advisor and coach, also the founder of Young Scrappy and Glimmer Financial. Michelle is passionate about helping marginalized communities build a better relationship with money, one rooted in joy, abundance, and alignment rather than fear and societal pressure. Together, we're going to unpack how shame shows up in our financial lives, whether through the fear of looking like we don't have it together, or the guilt that keeps us from seeking help or making aligned choices with our money. We're going to explore how the optics of wealth, especially under capitalism, can pull us away from living in integrity with our values. So if you've ever felt behind, overwhelmed, or like you just aren't good with money, this one's for you. So let's dive in. Michelle, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Me too. And I feel like I'm in this sort of transition point right now. My daughter is graduating in a month from preschool, and she is in this spot where she's wanting to start earning. We're going to do a point system, but really we're talking about this concept of money, and it's coming up, and she actually just signed up for an entrepreneurship market recently. And as I'm thinking about and talking to my husband about what do we want to teach her? What are our values? What have we really sort of come to that's important to us? I've started to revisit myself at 5 and myself as a young person thinking about money. And gosh, am I excited for us to talk about this concept and the story that people have about money today, because I'm realizing that for so many people, these stories start as young as my daughter, as young as 5 years old.
Yeah, it's wild. And we don't even necessarily think of it that way. Our thoughts and feelings around money tend to be so attached to what we're going through now, or even things in the recent rear view that maybe we're not proud of. But what we don't always consider is that most of us actually have decades of underlying experiences that have all been blended up into this like money mindset smoothie. We all have a lot of experiences that feed into our current beliefs. What a fascinating thing for you to get to experience as a parent.
Yeah, it's interesting to feel the weight. It's also, I think, really cool. Everything is how we choose to see it, right? And so if I'm like, this is going to be terrible, it's overwhelming, I don't know how it's going to go, it's going to feel terrible and overwhelming, and I'm going to feel like I have no control. In these situations, I think I'm learning that so much of how I show up, how I'm learning, how I engage, how I commit to myself or my values is this very iterative process. And I think it's giving me a little bit of flexibility to say, I don't have to have the perfect answer. I also want her to be a part of the conversation, to ask questions and to learn. And that's the gift I can give, is to sort of be open to that. But I know for myself growing up, I didn't have that experience. And I think many of the listeners here probably didn't have a lot of open conversations about money. A lot of it was maybe what they observed, what they were told, kind of what they witnessed with their parents or their caregivers, how they experienced money relating to maybe having the shoe that they wanted for school, or if they could afford to buy new clothes, or what food looked like, or if they went out to eat. So there was an association of maybe a status that people started to relate to money. But I think it was definitely more convoluted. And so I'm curious for you, because you made a very specific commitment. Not only do you do financial advising and work with people in this money sphere, you're very specific in what your values and your goals are and who and how you're working with money. Tell us a little bit about your money story. What did you learn, and how did that shape the views that you had and why you're so committed to the people, the mission, and the goals that you have now in your work with others and their money stories.
It's interesting because I think, like so many backgrounds, you can easily cherry pick the great stories or the stressful stories. And I think as a kid, my parents were careful to raise both my little brother and I with a sense of financial literacy. My dad is actually an accounting professor and spent his entire career
Hmm.
teaching accounting at Emory University. And my mom has a master's degree in library science. So big nerd energy over here in the Waymire household. I remember as a kid, one of my earliest memories was going to the bank, and I was maybe, gosh, like 4 or 5. And my little brother at that point would have been like 2 or 3. And my mom took us to open up our first, little baby checking accounts. And I remember a bank smell. I remember lollipops. I remember my little brother had to be told to put his pants back on. But I was not super at that point. I was sort of like, well, this is a thing that mommy wants us to do, and I love following the rules, and so this is
Mm,
fine. But I think especially as a kid, I didn't really appreciate what it was for or why we would do this, except that like an adult said it was an important thing, and that
mm,
must make it important. I didn't realize later the true importance of money until my first memorable trip to Disney World. And then I start to connect like money is a way to get more of what we want. And as a
mm,
kid, what I really wanted was to go to Orlando and see Mickey Mouse. And so my second big formative money memory, we got back from this Disney trip and I had a little like autograph book with all the little like character signatures in it. And I remember at the back thinking, okay, if I could get more money, then I could do this more. And so I started my first official budget, which was called the Disney Fund. And there were like $70 in it from some birthdays and some Christmases and some silly stuff. And my brother and I pooled our resources. And so he put in his $3.35. And we were like, we're really going to nail this.
mhm.
And it's not necessarily something that like turned into a true budgeting exercise for us. And I'm pretty sure after a week we abandoned the pursuit. But in hindsight, growing up, one at the time, I definitely didn't realize the role that, like, I didn't realize how formative that was going to be at the time.
Mhm.
And of course, it wasn't until so much later that I started doing financial advisory work and started working with a wide variety of communities. I'm a queer person, so I spend a lot of time working with the LGBT community, and those are my people. And, now in hindsight, I look at that and yes, it's very cute. And also, like, what an incredible sign of privilege that my
Yeah.
childhood perspective around money was that it was to be used to see Mickey Mouse.
Yeah.
And obviously, I look back on that now with like so much like compassion and tenderness for that little bean. But I think that's really what was missing in my early financial journey is we actually did not have a huge emphasis on investing it. That was not something we talked about. Saving certainly was, but it was much more aligned with saving for the purchases or experiences that felt fun to you and not
Mhm.
necessarily budgeting from the standpoint of survival. It felt like managing your money helped you get more extras. And it didn't
Yeah.
even occur to me that there would be kids who didn't go to Disney World when I was a kid.
I mean, I think that's such an important piece because, obviously at that time, you weren't going to recognize privilege in the same way. And I think while more and more conversations happen at younger ages now for many people about privilege, we have this conversation with our daughter all the time, just recognizing that, like, when you go to school, there are some kids that have different things than you do. Like, we shop at Goodwill. We love it. We have no shame in shopping at Goodwill and buying these absolutely wonderful clothes. And there are some kids that, when we get a trip to go to the Nike store, like, she can pick out something and she gets a certain amount of money. But if she wants something more than that, we talk about that's not really something that makes sense for us when we're talking about what our needs are versus what our wants are. And so if we need a pair of shoes, we want this $75 pair of shoes. And so we like talk about the privilege of being able to even have some of those things and how different kids have different privileges. There are some kids that don't have access to these things, what that looks like. But I never had any of those conversations growing up. And so for you to go back and even think about, what you said that I wrote down was money equates to getting more of what you want. And so now being able to separate out money was a tool to get what you want, not even connecting it to the needs. Probably, I'm making an assumption here that your basic needs were never something you questioned being met. And so you didn't have to have that association in the same way, or maybe your awareness was different. But then looking at it where there are many people that money was this association with, can I get what I need? And then also, at least I think something that I saw when I got older, I lived with my grandma, and there was a few different circumstances that led me to be on free and reduced lunch. And I remember even the experience of if I had more money, people wouldn't think I was different. And so, like, these little pieces where it's like, I want to fit in and I want these fun and cool things and I want to feel secure and I want, X, Y, and Z. Taking this down, and I want to break it down more, you're alluding to the fact that as you got older, you were recognizing sort of different experiences. And again, this idea of money also equals security. And one of the other words I wrote down was safety for people. How does that start to enter into the conversation? And is that something you see for yourself or even for the people you work with that was also coming up for them at those same formative years?
That's a great question. I feel like for a lot of folks who have maybe come from a background that was more financially challenging, I want to, I think, affirm what you said around your comment about free and reduced lunch, that people wouldn't think I was different if I had more money.
Mhm.
And I think especially as you get older and you start to notice what's happening with your peers and what they're
Mhm.
wearing and what they're buying and what's in their lunch boxes, we do start to form these beliefs and associations with the world around us. One of the things that I think is particularly interesting about this work, though, is that sometimes I work with folks who come from a background of privilege and they have this extremely intense and almost self-defeating frugality as a result
Mm.
of it. Sometimes I see folks from a background of wealth and privilege who are not particularly skilled at managing their own financial needs because they've never had to. And
Mhm.
likewise, I think I've worked with folks from a background of poverty who feel like they have to spend every penny while they have it because who knows how
Yeah.
long it's going to last. And then others who, again, on the other side, go through poverty and say, I never want to be in that situation again. I'm going to
Mhm.
stack every penny I can. I'm going to prepare for every eventuality to never get back in that place. And so,
Mhm.
one of the things that I think is so fascinating about this work is, I have worked with such a wide range of both abundance and scarcity mindsets, of feeling like they were great with money or not great with money.
Yeah.
And it sounds wild, but there's, in my experience, almost zero correlation to what their actual background was.
Mm.
And so I think there's something really to be said about honoring the fact that our beliefs about money are so vitally important in this process.
Mhm.
And that, you know, I hesitate to use this phrase because I never want to assume, but like, I hate the let me pull myself up by my bootstraps
Yeah.
vibe. I think that's a
Yes.
toxic mentality. But at the same time, I think learning and growth are possible
Mhm.
regardless of your background.
Mhm.
And so I think understanding and unpacking our money stories, really thinking through You probably learned some really great lessons. You probably learned some bad lessons. I think almost what's more important in a way is doing the work to unpack those messages and then decide which ones you want to keep.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot about I'll often do what's called a TME assessment, so time, money, and energy, and that's a lot of the conversation I'll have with people is these are your resources that are available to you, and how we're spending them often becomes and again, whether you're actually spending them or not spending them, where they're going or where they're not going is a reflection on your shame stories, your values, your scarcity mindset, all of these pieces. And so when I think about what you're describing, the oversimplification would be, yeah, just get over it and be fine. That's that sort of pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality. You can't be like, you shouldn't be upset because you can fix it. You can change your story. That's not what we're saying. I think what I'm really hearing that I think is key is to recognize there is the reality, the very objective. This was the resource available to you, the amount of that resource, the access to that resource, either in your past or your present, or even as we're thinking about money in the future, what that looks like. And we know our relationship to that resource often is a major indicator in the experience we have around and with it. And so if we weren't talking about money, if we're talking about time, there's this notion, we see it in the world around us. We live in hustle culture. It's, I've always got to be doing something. I don't have time for that. I don't have time for this. I'm too busy. I'm constantly busy. That's the way we engage that social capital. The reality is, if we look at people's time, there actually probably is ways that we could change our relationship to our time in that moment. Objectively, we could make time to do those things. It's our relationship with time and doing versus not doing, how we're supposed to be spending our time that gets in the way. And so I'm curious because I can imagine as someone starts to have this conversation with you, often defenses do go up. And I think for many people, when they have whether that is scarcity around money or fear around money in different ways, any sort of way that you're going to push, there is going to be a defense. But you don't understand. I had this, or I didn't have this, and I have to defend against this. Or I watched my caregiver blow all of our money and they weren't paying attention to these things. Or in my case, my mom had a very serious drug addiction and we lost everything. And so being like, I don't ever want that to happen again. I need to be prepared that at any moment, the rug could get pulled out from under me. I don't want that. And I remember, I mean, my husband and I have been together for 15 years now, and he wanted to start using a budgeting software. And my hyper fixation on control, I wouldn't give up using my Excel spreadsheet for the longest time because I didn't like the idea that I wasn't the one inputting everything and in control of it all. I didn't want him to look at it. I didn't want him to touch it. There was such a panic of, what if I can't plan for and prepare for what's going to happen? And so when he would bring something up like investing or using a budgeting software or talking about our financial goals, anytime that something would come up that wasn't sort of the defense reactive, this is what I have to do just to make sure that I'm okay in this moment, I could feel myself being like that dog backed into a corner. Don't touch it. Don't come at me. I'm assuming this happens with you in conversations with people, whether it is this more aggressive way that I'm sort of describing that I would get, or fear-based and passive aggressive. What do you do with that? How do you hold space and how do you help them separate out those beliefs, those fears, those very valid stories from the reality of the numbers to then start developing a different relationship with it?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I totally understand how you would have that experience feeling so like guarded and precious around your numbers based on your past. And I think that defensiveness uh, it can come up for folks when it feels like we want to defend why something happened or give context for it. And you're exactly right. Like the beliefs versus objective numbers conversation, I think for me starts with truly being able to think through budget neutrality and number neutrality. For a lot of folks, where we start with is like, okay, let's look and see where you're at. And then how do you feel about it?
Mm.
Because if you do feel good about it, then, how can we take the, behaviors or habits or lessons or things that you're really proud of
Mm-hmm.
and make sure that that still happens. But there's certainly a bias there. People don't usually seek out a financial coach because they want to pay a bunch of money to get gold stars from a professional,
Right.
right? So I think people often do come into the engagement gratefully with this sense of like, okay, something's not working. And maybe they know that it's a specific something, or maybe they know I'm just not sleeping well at night, or I think about this
Mm.
all the time and I'm tired of it taking up space in my brain. And like, I just got to change something because whatever's happening now is not it. Like, this is not the way. One of the things I really like to invite people to think through when I talk about number neutrality is to really consider a scenario where the numbers you have would feel good or feel bad for you. So I want to take an example
Mm.
that I see with a lot of clients, and that's credit card debt. A lot of folks who come to me for coaching need support around credit card debt.
Mm-hmm.
And it's obviously something that a lot of folks struggle with. Nobody talks about it. We always think we're the only one in the world and we better not say anything because our friends and neighbors are going to judge us if they know. And I can tell you from my personal experience, it's so much more common than you think because I still have a job. So let's say you have a number in mind around your credit card debt, and I've seen debts of 500, I've seen debts of 5,000, I've seen credit card debt of 50,000, more than that even. And one of the things I like to remind folks is it's not just that number as a number. There's no like credit card police truly that will come and say, you've hit the threshold and now we're here to judge and shame you, right? We invent that stuff in our heads. But what
Mm-hmm.
is relevant is maybe how that number relates to what we have to work with every month, or how that
Mm-hmm.
number relates to what's in our checking account, or what our salary looks like. Instead of thinking of that number as inherently good or bad, what does it mean for you? And let's say you did have a credit card number that doesn't feel particularly good. We can honor the fact that that number could be neutral, because what if you used it to pay for life-saving chemotherapy treatment for your loved ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you had a $50,000 credit card bill that you knew went to save your favorite person's life, you would probably look at that number and say, thank goodness they're still here. Would it be
Mm.
stressful? Absolutely. Would you want to pay it down? For sure. Credit card interest is bonkers expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But depending on where the debt came from, how we manage it, how we can look at it going forward, those are equally important factors to the number. So I think even setting the stage to say, hey, look, you're allowed to feel however you want to feel about these numbers, but let's really get into why you feel this way, how
Mm-hmm.
you want to feel instead, and then like, what do we need to do to bridge that gap? What's going to get you to a place of feeling better? Is
Mm.
it knowing that you're making progress? Is it knowing that you have debt-free date or a light at the end of the tunnel? Like, what's going to help you get a little bit of relief around that? Because
Yeah.
if you're coming at it from a place where you're so emotionally worked up about it that it's hard to look at the statement and it's hard to log into Amex.com, it's going to be really hard to take action, even if you do feel like ass all the time. So we
Yeah.
sort of need to take the emotions down a notch, consider a world where, maybe that debt really did serve your past self, even if it's not the best thing for your future self,
Mm-hmm.
and really try and kind of walk through like, what are some thought exercises we can do to start to at least give ourselves a little bit of grace and mental relief around this topic, so that we can start to make more mindful and thoughtful and grounded decisions going forward.
Yeah, I love that the big thing you're really talking about here is when you describe this neutrality, you're really going, okay, what's the shame underneath this? How has money, I think many of us get into a position where money feels like it controls us, how much money we have or what we don't have, how much debt we have, what we can afford, other people's perceptions of what we have. We have so many projections and biases around that our relationship with money becomes one where we feel controlled by it rather than in control of it. And in those moments then when you're sort of layered and these very complex webs of shame. Maybe you're now shaming yourself for what you did spend that money on, that you didn't save better. You've got those stories. I'm bad with money, which is, I think, something so many of us have said in one way, shape, or form. All of that just keeps getting layered on top and on top and on top. And then, yeah, we develop this sort of avoidance relationship with it where it's still controlling us. We're just not looking it in the eyes. And so much of what you're talking about really is about taking the distortion off, or taking the distorted lenses out of how we're viewing it, to say, here's this very neutral information. Let's say someone's got $10,000 in credit card debt. This is purely a number. Your emotions are a reaction to the story that we're writing around this number. And from a radical acceptance point, this number is the number that it is. We can't change that in this moment. Obviously that's a big thing you work with people on, is making steps in the future. But in this moment, this is the number we have. We can't control that. We can control how we frame the story around it and how we're going to move forward. And I know a big thing that I've had to really work on, and comes up, I think, with a lot of clients, is when the shame story is around us being not good enough, not worthy, not smart, whatever it is. Money seems to be this big, giant flag that waves to the rest of the world to tell them whether or not that's true. And if I've got debt, if I can't handle this, if I don't make as much money as you do, I think about this as an entrepreneur now, like the fucking stories on social media about how much money you're supposed to make. And if you're not reviewing products on Amazon to make, I don't know, $600 million a month, then obviously what's wrong with you, because you should be flushed with cash. There's all these stories then that, like, it's so accessible and you're not doing it, meaning the problem is you. And I think all of that, it sounds like, is sort of the third party that you have to address in the room before you can even get to the numbers in a meaningful way with the clients that you're working with.
Oh my gosh, yes. I'm like over here nodding and snapping and like waving my hands in the air, like, oh my God, preach, you're so right. Because yeah, I feel like this, like, I think you really hit it on the head of like, it boils down to this feeling of like not being good enough.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I think is so interesting about that, or so challenging about that, is, well, what does good enough even mean, right?
Yeah.
Who gets to set that race course and tell you when you finished? And
Right.
it's so wild to me because I think insofar as we think of shame as like the consciousness of doing something wrong, like to have misstepped and to be acutely aware of that, I think it's so interesting because I always like to ask people, do you feel like you've let somebody else down, or do you feel like you let yourself down? In so many cases, what I see is people trying to model their financial behaviors or decisions or goals after what somebody else or what society or what the media has told them is right and appropriate.
Mhm.
And that's a whole thing to unpack of like, well, who told you that was important? And where did that come from? And do you agree with that? Right?
Yeah.
Now, I think it's one thing if a client comes to me and says, I have spent my money in a way that is misaligned with my own values. And maybe that shame really
Mm.
comes from feeling like truly you know how you want to spend money and you have not done that. To me, that actually is a very different problem than I've spent money exactly the way that I feel good about, but the
Yes.
problem is nobody else agrees with me.
Right.
And I think encouraging folks to really think about, you mentioned earlier, sort of this idea of money being a reflection of our values, kind of turning the mirror back and saying, like, well, what do you value?
Mhm.
What is important? Where do you want your money to go?
Yeah.
And then we can really see, like, okay, first, what is the litmus test that we're going to use to determine whether something was worth it or good? And like, let's make sure that we're the ones deciding what that definition is. And then two, you know, we're all human. And
Yeah.
sometimes we do have goals and values that feel very important to us and we don't quite get there. And then what do we do with that? And how do
Mhm.
we bring that behavior not into alignment with what we think other people want for us, but what we really and truly want for ourselves and our lives?
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I think so much of it is people will do these TME assessments and we're looking at their time, money, and energy. More of what I'm having conversations with people about is their time and energy, particularly because I can talk all about money, but I'm not a financial expert. So when it gets to that point, it's a lot of our money is just another way we can assess this. And a lot of the conversations that we have is we're recognizing how you're investing your time, how you're investing your money, how you're investing your energy is really a reflection on that spectrum of either shame driven or values driven living. And we're all somewhere on that spectrum and it ebbs and flows. And so the sort of truest, most authentic anchor point is really in alignment with our chosen values and allowing that to dictate our experiences. And we are social beings that have been normed to believe that external validation and approval and witnessing outranks our own values and wants. And so there are going to be times for all of us at different points in times, it'll go to varying degrees that we're going to get caught in those shame based choices. And so for some people, that is buying, like I still think back to high school where I got a second job purely to have enough money to buy the stupidest fucking shirts because every other kid wore them. Because everybody was wearing the Hollister double polos and they'd pop the collars and they had the Abercrombie jeans that there's no way that someone wasn't going to see your butt crack. And I just had to fit in. Again, I was already the kid whose mom was in prison. I was the kid that was on free and reduced lunch. I was the kid that was on open enrollment that didn't live in the suburb but lived outside. I had all these things stacked against me. I did spend my money in a very shame driven way. And so when you look at it, there is then either the layering of shame on top of shame of, well, I shouldn't have done that. Why didn't I choose to do the things I wanted? Or you go, gosh, what grace and compassion I can have for this 16-year-old that just wanted to feel like she belonged and felt like this was one way she could feel safe and secure. I don't need to shame her for that. I don't need to shame the 32-year-old me that when the craze of like home organization and all that chaos came on in the beginning of COVID was like, well, clearly I need to buy the cutest bins because that's going to be the best way I'm going to feel centered and organized and less overwhelmed in my life. That person was also seeking something, and that was the best way to approach it. And so I think a lot of it is that learning to view it from a place of curiosity and neutrality to then get to what you said of what's important to you. And I really like that you've brought up sort of in different ways this invitation to consider enough. What is enough for us? What is fulfilling for us? And that could be how much money do you need to have in your bank account to feel like you're prepared enough? It could also be what does it look like to have enough money or resources available to you to live a life that you don't have to constantly be in a state of hypervigilance? And if we can start to get to that place, we can imagine a time the reactivity, the shame isn't driving the bus. Thereby, I would assume what you see is the relationship with money can move to a place where it's an asset, not this controlling factor that keeps us in that sort of shame and gloom and doom space.
And I think one of the things that's so interesting about the way that you framed your journey just now, my guess would be that if you asked your teenage self, hey, I notice you're buying a lot of Hollister clothing. What are your thoughts on that? You would have been like, yeah, I look cool as hell right now. No further questions, please. Right. And in the COVID area, when we were all collectively and individually losing our shit,
Yeah.
I would personally argue, if you felt even the slightest bit more grounded looking at your beautifully organized fridge tubs of berries, then I love that for you.
Uh-huh.
But all that said, that evolution shows that our values change over time. And so, one, you can either beat your past self up for not having the same values, or my favorite way to think about it is, oh my gosh, what an incredible sign of personal growth for me that my purchasing is more aligned now. Like, oh my gosh, my sweet teenage self, my sweet being of a baby self was just trying to fit in. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And now I don't need to do that anymore. And I'm so
Yes.
grateful because there's way better things that I'd like to spend my money on. But what a sign of growth that now I'm not playing that game anymore. Like, good for me. I'm healing, And I think you can either beat yourself up over your past actions, or you can use that as a sign to know that it's time to do something different and use that as an opportunity to grow from.
I love that. And I think about that now as it relates to what I wanna teach my daughter, because at 5, her decision of what seems like a reasonable purchase is not what I, at 37 years old, think is a reasonable purchase. And so we're trying to teach her the idea of not just sort of impulse buying and impulse spending and doing, and sort of patience and slowing down, and what do you value, what do you want, but also not micromanaging every decision she makes, because I do think even the way you just reframed it, my ability to make some of those choices to then sit with how do I feel about that is also a really important part of the journey. And so if I spend my whole life, like I can imagine when you describe some of the clients that are like, I've never had to budget my money, I've never had to consider what this looks like. Maybe it's been taken care of for me, or maybe it's just felt like I have this sort of abundance available. There is no opportunity then to say, well, what I'm spending, how does it reflect? Or why does it matter? Or how do I feel? Or vice versa. When someone's like, I've never even had the opportunity to know what it feels like to buy something that I wasn't told was very strictly in our budget. The decisions were made for you in different ways. And again, with different amounts of this resource available. And so it does feel like it's a balance. And unfortunately, it's something that I think requires patience and the willingness to be curious and to explore what our relationship is. I think where some people get stuck is, but at the end of the day, we need money to pay our bills, to be secure. And so it feels like, well, I can't afford to have those times where I'm not on top of it, where I don't have it all completely figured out. I don't have every answer. I'm not saving, I'm not prepared for this. So there's this sort of, again, scarcity anxiety that comes up and stops us from having that grace, having that exploration. What do we do with that? What do we do with that for ourselves individually, or for the listeners that are parents that are thinking about, oh God, I don't want to pass my I'm bad with money story down to my kids, or have them be stressed in the same way that I was? How do we shift to a place of saying, okay, real talk, you do need money. You absolutely require money to be able to do certain things. And again, coming back to your point in the beginning, that there's still this difference between belief and resource availability. And we still can look at that resource and help you figure out how to do that without it creating so much angst and overwhelm. Or, like in the case of me as a parent, being something that you have to be so panicked about how you're going to communicate it and worry about every single message that you give, because you're somehow going to fuck her up. And then when she's 37, she's going to have this whole I'm terrible with money, I don't know what to do mindset.
I will give an important caveat here, which is that my one child is a 17-year-old Jack Russell Chihuahua mix. So we don't have a lot of financial conversations. I have 0 human children. And so obviously I work with a lot of parents. A lot of my clients are parents, but I've never been in the trenches as a parent. So I want to give that caveat. Your mileage may vary here. But I think what's really important is to honor both the needs and the wants, because really instilling the understanding that you do have needs and that money is there to meet those needs and to make sure that you are safe and supported. But I have every single person I have worked with likes to spend money on at least one category of something. And one of the challenges that I think parents can sometimes fall into is honoring the fact that your kid might actually have different preferences than you do, and that's okay. And so, I think when we think about our values, you probably as a parent have values that you are proud of, and obviously you want to pass those on.
Mhm.
And also, one of the challenges with kids is they are little independent thinkers and you cannot tell them what to think. And
Yeah.
so there is an element too to say, like, you can't tell them what to love. You can't tell them what brings them joy in terms of spending, but you can be there to facilitate and ask those questions and say, well, what do you like? And why do you
Mm.
like it? And tell me about that thing. And does that really bring you joy? And are you having so much fun? And if the answer to all of those questions is yes, to me, that actually is a great thing to spend money on. And like, yeah, do you want a Bratz doll? Probably not. But at the end of the day, if that is like the thing your kid loves and plays with all the time and they never regret spending their money on it, then that is a parenting win. So just
Mm.
to kind of be, again, mindful and loving with the fact that just because they don't have identical values and interests doesn't mean you fucked it up.
Right. Right, and also knowing I think about too, like, the context of a five-year-old's life, if she wants to spend $3 on the 74th container of slime that we can make for 6 cents at our house, but it makes her feel so happy and she's excited and she's doing it. It is her money, and we do have those conversations. I ask her those questions, I do those things, and it's like, I don't think that is reasonable, but I also would never choose to spend my fun money on buying myself slime. So in relation to that, maybe it doesn't make sense to me, but also, I think what you said, it isn't that we can't tell them what to do, it's that by telling them what to do, we're not building a relationship that allows them to feel like they can make choices based on their values. What we're doing is shaming them for not having the values that we have. And so it is okay for me to say, for example, she did want a really sweet pair of shoes from Nike. I gave her the amount of money, or my husband and I did, that we would spend on a pair of shoes based on the average cost of shoes that we can get for her that are good quality. The ones that she wanted that were more than that, we said, gosh, if these are the shoes that you really want for your school year, great. And that means that you will be responsible for covering the difference. Does that feel like that's something that you want to spend your money on? Does that feel like that's something you want to put your money towards? Is that worth it to you? And to watch her really think through that and then make that decision, it is cool to see. And it's saying, we can still have boundaries. We can still say, yeah, we're not buying candy every time we go to the store just because you have your own money. There's still things that we're teaching you. And how do I really honor your autonomy and promote that? And I think for many of us, that idea of I'm bad with money came from this very closed door mentality that our relationship with money is iterative. And so then it became this very all or nothing. People are either good at money or they're bad at money. Whereas most of us, and I'm sure you could attest to this, especially now with all the changes in the world and the financial world specifically, there are ebbs and flows with how good and confident we all feel with money, no matter your expertise and what we're doing with it and how we're managing it. And so instead, it's recognizing, how do we get to a place where we say, my relationship with money is iterative? And maybe it's something like, I struggle with money, or money really overwhelms me, or I'm really scared that I'm going to make choices with money that don't allow me to feel safe and secure. When we can get to those statements instead of just, well, I'm bad with money, we can change it from a place of shame and these core beliefs that then lead us to not look at our credit card bills or avoid looking at things. And instead, we can go, how do I then need to address that? What do I need to deal with those experiences, those feelings, those emotions, so I can get to a place where I don't have to be so afraid every time I open up my bank account or my online banking network. And I can feel a bit more neutral and I can learn how to move forward with money in a way that aligns with me. When you think about that, because I think for every single person listening, again, in some way, shape, or form, the thought has entered our head, I am bad with money, or I don't have enough money, or I am not okay with money. There's been some very clear statement, this assumption of truth that we've made that is, in fact, not objective, but a subjective, shame driven thought. And so if we could shift that, it sounds like that's really going to be the thing that unlocks the door to a lot of the work that you do with clients. What would you say is that first step or a little invitation that we could give people to work on as it relates to that story for themselves to start this work of unwrapping or untethering themselves to this idea that they suck with money and money is always going to be controlling them?
It's so notoriously hard to change our thoughts out of thin air. So I think giving yourself the invitation to look for even the slightest little nuance, behavior, past story, anything you can think of. Like, what is one thing I can point to in my life that contradicts that story? I have never worked
Mm,
with a single client who made only bad financial decisions. It's
mm,
literally impossible. You can't make 100% bad decisions all the
yeah.
time and survive. And so, what can you point at that kind of drives a little bit of a knife in that argument, right? Maybe you have a
Yes.
lot of debt, but maybe your credit score is actually pretty good. Or maybe you're not proud of your budget all the time, but your bills get paid on time and they have not shut up your electricity yet. Everybody has a little sliver of something that they can feel good about and proud of. And so to kind of use that as the seed to say, okay, if I have thought of one way where I haven't royally fucked up, odds are good. There's probably other things that I have done that weren't all terrible either.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, once you start to not just look for the bad behaviors and outcomes, if you start to think of even keep a list or journal of like, what are the things about my financial decisions or things that I purchased that I'm really proud of? And trying to keep as much track and attention on the good stuff as you do churning over the bad stuff, it will start to strip away the power of the phrase, I'm bad with money.
Mm,
And I think over time, you start to get enough momentum to your thought processes and to your behavior that you maybe get a little bit curious like, well, what else could I do that will make me feel good about myself? Like, what other decisions can I make that I can put on my I'm proud of this sheet? Really allowing yourself to like build that library of confidence can be a really helpful exercise as we're cataloging all of our thoughts and negative experiences too.
I love that. I love that sort of notion of, again, nothing is entirely good or bad, right or wrong 100% of the time. I think, again, that's where that nuance piece comes into play and that realization. As someone who has had to recover from a lot of my own perfectionism and people pleasing, and particularly working with people in the eating disorder realm when I started my career, that was a lot of the conversation is when we get stuck in these very constrictive thought patterns that are, I have to be this weight to be happy, or I can only eat this much, or I can only do these things. It's very similar with money, and it almost becomes an addiction. Our brain, there's sort of an obsessive thinking around these pieces. And we chase this idea of if I can get to this place or do these things, I will be okay. Or this idea of, well, I can never get to these things. Everything's terrible. I'm always going to be bad with money. And so it is really this sort of creating the gray space, living in sort of the nuance of it all. Now, I know there's going to be people listening to this that are one going to be like, I need to hear Michelle all the time. I want to hear so much more. And so we need to tell them where they can find you to hear about all the other things that you're doing. And then there's going to be people that are like, I just want to get in Michelle's caseload. I want to work one on one. I am ready to do some of this. And I think that these are the conversations I've been missing to change my relationship with money and to really start to see it as an asset or an additive in my life, not something to be afraid of. And so, where can people go to satisfy all of those cravings and curiosities with you?
I'm actually the founder and owner of a business called Young and Scrappy. You can find us online at young, YOUNG, and scrappy.com. You'll find all kinds of information about our services and how we support people on their financial journey. And if you follow us along, we are actually launching, or depending if you're listening from the future, hello, future you, we are launching a program called the Radical Wealth Collective, and that is for progressive, values minded folks to have a safe space for financial conversations, to have access to financial literacy content that does not tell you that you're not allowed to go eat at a goddamn restaurant if you have a credit card debt, and tries to bring a much more loving and compassionate approach to the work. So, youngandscrappy.com, and be on the lookout for Radical Wealth Collective as well.
I love this. And listeners, we will have all of this information down in the show notes. Michelle, thank you so much. I really appreciated, and I'm sure you agree, the opportunity to just like touch the tip of the iceberg on this conversation, and already just the things that are getting brought up and just the questions I'm thinking about for myself. It's awesome. And I think listeners, this is a testament to why these podcast episodes are so amazing, because they can spark that interest and they can really generate that curiosity and that sort of domino of insight building. And now it's on you to say, yeah, I'm resonating with this. I want to move forward. And here is this safe person that is coming here committed to helping people untether their shame on this given area. And so please check out those resources down in the show notes. I can say from the first moment that Michelle and I connected via email, everything about your energy is just, there's a peace and a safety to it. And so, listeners, if I can feel that through email, I guarantee it's going to be even more if you are in some of these spaces. And so, all of this to say, I want you to, as you finish this episode, ask yourself to take one thing. Maybe it's one reflection question. Maybe it's one point. For me, I think the thing I'm thinking about is, how do I empower Everly to explore her values in a really open and curious way without expecting that every action 100% lines up with it, but more the idea that her actions, including what she spends her money on, are how she figures out what she values and how she wants to move forward. And can I come from a place of curiosity rather than pressure, like it's my job to make sure it's perfect all the time? And so, whatever's sitting with you, take that, allow that to be the thing you marinate on or work through, and then come back to this episode. Or, hey, go to those show notes and take it to that next step. Because this is an iterative process, like we've said 9,462 times. And the more grace and space and curiosity we can give ourselves and others in recognizing that it's a process, the more likely we're all going to continue to move to that space of resilience together. So until next week, take that peace with you, and I will see you next time.